little gold filaments kind of came out of the form. So it would be like if you scratched something and it just kind of shredded. I didn't feel anything, but I just saw gold filaments, like where it had torn, where it almost like there was no substance to it, but once I put my hand through it, it basically tore open, and the edge of each rip had this little gold filament alongside it. That I'm trying to. I hope you get that visual, because it was quite terrifying to me. And then it just wasn't there. There's no puff of smoke. There was no blink. It was simply wasn't there anymore. Now, I didn't go back to bed. And the rest of the time that I was staying at my grandma's house, I didn't like facing that way when I slept, but I almost felt like I had to. I never saw that again. But what I started to see were the dogs. I started to see these big, black, shadow dogs. They looked more like bulls. They had the shape, not necessarily with the horns. They had these. It was one of the. I think dog is the easiest way to explain it, because the heads seemed like canines, but they had more of the like torso of like a bull-shaped creature with kind of shorter back legs. The thing with the dogs they were always flat. It was like watching a two-dimensional image walk by. I didn't see them super often in the beginning, but when I saw them, I would get the sense that they were evil, sinister. The boy was the boy, and I got more of this sense that I don't know what I really thought of that emotionally, but the dogs terrified me. And again, it was that same thing, that dark beyond dark. And I would see them, usually, they would walk along the wall, because they were flat. So and this wasn't just in my grandma's house at this point, I was seeing these other places. If the wall had like a little corner, you would watch it and it would turn that corner like a shadow just being projected on the wall, and would kind of move around the room. Now, of course, at this point, I think I'm going crazy. At this point, I think I'm actually losing it. Because what rational person would see stuff like that? So, and let's, in this timeline, in 1997, 1998, I wasn't smoking marijuana. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. But I was seeing these things. And I always were looking for ghosts. I was always investigating and being intrigued by this stuff. But there was no chemical outside to this. But I was thinking, I'm obviously going crazy. I'm seeing things. These things don't actually exist. And then I started seeing what most people know of as the Shadow Man. But I was seeing a lot of them at once. The Shadow Men phenomenon is very common. You can find a ton of articles in it. I'll try to find some. Well, I won't try to find some. I'll link some in the show notes below. The Shadow Men generally come to people when they sleep. There's one of them that is sinister. They tend to wear trench coats, and they have these big top hats, and there's reports of them around the world. Now, the internet wasn't really a thing when this was going on. People had it, but it was like the dial-up. You didn't have all these resources. Everything you wanted to learn about ghosts, you had to find in a book, hopefully, then television, and then a friend telling you a spooky story. I had not heard of the Shadow Men that I can recall before I started seeing them. What was different about the Shadow Men, though, is one, I didn't get a sense that they were evil. I got a sense that they were almost beyond that. Very advanced. I got a feeling that they were curious, maybe. But not curious like they want to communicate with me. Curious the way that I'm curious when I see a caterpillar walk across the leaf. Like the the scale of intelligence was so vast between me and whatever this was that I was nothing to it. The other weird thing was that they also were darker than dark, but when I looked at them, I could feel this weird thing where my eyes and my brain wanted to put color in them. Like, I could almost perceive a shifting color within the darkness. It's really hard to explain, because I'd look at it and my eyes would perceive the blackest of black, this dark form, but my mind could almost see color inside of it. And I've mentioned stuff about ghosts and aliens where I go, I think it's more likely they come from another dimension. That's what this felt like. It felt like the colors that my mind was trying to perceive is something that's not perceivable in our dimension or with the limitations of our eyes. So our brain just shuts down and says it's black because it can't perceive the colors that this thing actually is. So at this point, I have two options. I'm going crazy and I'm seeing this stuff everywhere. Or this stuff is real. Now, the way I always dealt with this stuff. And I try to be, and nowadays I'm very good at this. Back then I was kind of okay with it, but I have a rule that I don't tell you what I'm seeing. I let you see it, and me see it, and I ask you what you see. If we see the same thing, it's really there. If I go, oh my god, look at an old witch is flying across the moon, and then you go, oh my god, you're right, that doesn't help me at all. If I look up and I'll go, hey, look at that. Someone else looks up and they're like, is that a witch flying across the moon? I'm like, mm-hmm. So I brought a bunch of friends over to my grandma's house because that was a hotbed of activity. Now, like I said, I'd seen the dogs other places and things like that. I would generally see the shadow men in various places, but I remember telling people that I think my grandma's backyard is haunted because I'm seeing some weird stuff there. At this point, I'd actually had a room built onto my grandma's house because I was staying there for a long time. I love my grandparents. They're all passed away now, but it was a really good time living there. But, so, I brought over a bunch of friends, and I was with my buddy Josh, and my friend Jackie, and a couple other people. And we were all like, oh yeah, we're gonna go ghost hunting, but let's start off at Jason's grandma's house, because that place is totally creepy. And Jackie's 12, by the way, and I would have been, at this point in time, 1997, would have been about 19, 20, something around there. Josh was about the same age. We're just all young kids, and then we got like this little girl hanging out with us. It was Josh's sister. So we go there, and everyone hangs back, because it was a really creepy house. Everyone hangs back but me and Jackie. And I saw one of the shadow people standing in the doorway between the garage and the backyard. And I had a really weird visual that time. It was nighttime, of course. That's when you go ghost hunting with your friends. And the shadow man is standing there at night. And I look at him. And these things are like 7-8 feet tall. And what I perceived, like looking at him, it seemed like it was daytime on the other side of him. Now, beyond his actual outline of his form, it was nighttime, but I had this weird sensation that it was daytime behind him or through him. There were two other shadow men standing in the back of this backyard at night. And it would have been fall. It was a little cold. Now, I told you my rule about not explaining stuff, but this was a time I didn't have that rule perfected. And me and Jackie walk up to the doorway. And Jackie says something to the effect that I'm really creeped out. And I said, there's one in front, because I told them, again, I wasn't 100% on my plan, but I will get to that in a second. I told him, I said, yeah, I think there's these shadow people walking in my backyard. I don't know how to explain them. They're just these big shadows walking around. I tell Jackie, I go, yeah, there's one in front of us right now. Now, her being a 12-year-old girl, not really thinking about anything, she sticks her hand right through the thing's chest. Now, of course, she doesn't see anything. To her, she's just sticking her hand through a doorway into the dark backyard. And what I see is her hand where his chest should be, or his stomach, because she's quite short. And she goes, "It's warm. My hand's warm here." Now, I didn't tell her, "Oh, it looks like daytime in him." But she was feeling warmth where her hand was there. Now, I'm not going to let a 12-year-old girl be more brave than I am, so I put my hand into him as well. And it was warm. And I start to say something to her, and my hand is just where both of our hands are just sticking halfway through a doorway. Anyone walking by would just see two people sticking their hands through a doorway into the backyard at night. I say something to her, and I look over at her, and then I start to turn my hand, because I'm kind of almost feeling the temperature. And now my hand is basically, the back of my hand is facing me completely. All 5 fingers are, I'm looking at all 5 fingers. But the thing is, my pinky, and what is that? My other index finger, the finger next to the pinky, they're gone. They're completely gone. All I see is my thumb, my ring, and my middle finger. And then is almost like just my hand was, the other 2 fingers and that part of my hand were completely gone, enveloped in darkness. They didn't exist anymore. Wasn't a trick of the light, it was gone. And this is when I used my plan. I'm looking at my hand and it's flat out. And I go, "Jackie, do you see something weird?" And she looks over and she goes, "Your fingers are missing." We both pull our hands out. We run back to the car. And that wasn't the last time I saw the shadow people. It was the last time I interacted with them on that way. I never tried to communicate with them, never tried to do a seance or Ouija board or anything like that. To me, those things don't seem like they would work, because these things didn't necessarily seem like ghosts. But I don't know what they were. It's been a long, long time since I've seen a shadow man, or one of those shadow dogs, or the boy. But one of the last times I ever saw them, I remember I was driving home late at night, just driving through Orangevale. It's maybe like 2 in the morning. I always stayed up late. And they were everywhere. I just saw 2 walking down the block here. A dog walking across the street, flat, but moving somehow. Sometimes they moved in pairs, sometimes alone. But I saw them everywhere that night. I didn't sleep that night either. True story. Totally true story. To be our email address. You can also hit us up at facebook.com/deadrabbitradio. If I see one of those things tonight, dude. Twitter is at Jason O. Carpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great weekend, guys, and we will be back Monday. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we listen to an older episode with a new introduction. This episode actually doesn't need much of an introduction. When I first before I started doing the show, whenever I talked about paranormal encounters that I had, these are kind of the stories I would start off with. Because when we look at ghost hunting, a lot of times we base it on stuff we see in television or stuff we've read in books. But the first story is about a guy with some workplace violence, a man with a sword. I have nothing to do with that story, although I thought that segment was really interesting too. But the 2 follow-up stories, my 2 paranormal encounters, they're not things that you think would happen if you're hunting ghosts. They're not things that I thought were possible. And they are bone-chilling. The implications of these stories, which as far they happened to me, You can believe me, you cannot believe me, you can think I was mistaken, I could have been mistaken. All of those things are possible. But I experienced them, and I believe them to be